back once again. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we are continuing with our study of Vrindavan. We've been going close to 1 year now, almost 1 year, 2 or 3 times a week. And we still haven't taken all the jewels out of the treasure chest of the books that the 6 Goswamis left us, that our previous acharyas have left us, and of course what Srila Prabhupada has given us. In the year 1516, 1 year after Lord Chaitanya's visit to Vrindavan, Sri Rupa Goswami and Sri Sanatana Goswami arrived in Vrindavan. As we've mentioned numerous times, Lord Chaitanya requested them, amongst other things, to discover the lost places of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. Now we know at that time, Vrindavan was very much different than it is today. That's not an exaggeration. Vrindavan was, at the time of the Goswamis, in every sense of the word, a jungle. And as such, they wandered through, Vrindavan's many forests. Obviously, they had to live very austerely. Typically, we hear that they, quote, lived under a different tree every night. But more detailed research shows that they would often take shelter in the hollow of a tree, a clearing in a thorny thicket, or sometimes they lived in an underground cave. Actually, I was reading that Jiva Goswami, he came a little later, and he once resided in a vacant crocodile hole at Nandagat on the Jamuna River. That's the lives they lived. And in these austere settings, when Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis first came, they chanted the holy names and wrote sublime books on the science of Krishna consciousness. I recently read that Srila Sanatana Goswami would sleep only 2 to 3 hours a day, and at night he would burn dried leaves, and with that light he would write his books. Yes. He would burn dried leaves, and with that light he would write his books. How precious it is what they've given us, and we must take advantage to read these books. Of course, we can understand that whatever condition Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis had to face, they were always blissful, because internally they're always there in their spiritual forms as Sri Rupa Manjari and Lavanga Manjari, maidservants of Radha and Krishna, who had appeared as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had given them service in Sri Vrindavan as Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. And they did that service so well. I read last night, Prabhupada said one time, Vrindavan is the gift of Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. They wrote many books so poor people could take advantage and become Krishna conscious. What does he mean by poor people? People who are bereft of the richness of Krishna consciousness. And as I mentioned earlier, Srila Jiva Goswami arrived sometime later, actually 1535, 19 years after Rupa and Sanatana had come to Braja. And as he entered Braja, he was greeted by Sanatana Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, Prabodhananda Saraswati, and Kashishwara Pandit. And soon afterwards, Jiva Goswami took shelter of Rupa Goswami in particular, and he rendered many menial services to him. I was reading he was begging alms for Rupa Goswami. He was cooking for Rupa Goswami. He was washing Rupa Goswami's feet, and he was helping to prepare the manuscripts. Great acharyas, but they also rendered menial service. That's a way to become dear to the heart of your well-wishers. During this time, devotees, inspired by the Six Goswami, were also writing books about Krishna consciousness in Vrindavan. There were other devotees there as well. Other people were also writing. And I read they were writing on palm leaves, bark, and even old deity dresses. They were writing on palm leaves, bark, or even old deity dresses. Apparently there were some sadhus had deities, and when they were writing, they'd write on the old deity dresses, nothing else. But our Goswamis, however, I was reading, they used handmade paper donated by Rajput kings from Rajasthan. Especially the gifts were coming from Jai Singh II later on. And on this royal paper, you could say, they penned books like Ujjvala Nilamani, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Gopal Champu. And I was told that even today in Jaipur you can purchase handmade paper. And a book called Sadhana Dipika, it mentions that Sri Rupa Goswami had many skills. He could prepare deities. It means he could carve deities. He could draw expertly. He was a master of astrology and mathematics, and he was fluent in Sanskrit, Persian, Bengali, and other languages. And of course, he was a renowned Gaudiya Vaishnava philosopher. And he was, I found out he was also very popular, very respected by other sampradayas as well. So it was in the year 1542 that Rupa Goswami utilized his talents to personally carve and install and offer a very beautiful deity, Damodar, Krishna, to Jiva Goswami, his disciple. And there were details. It's so interesting. Rupa Goswami carved Damodar from a piece of black marble that was brought from the Vindhya Parvat mountain. There you go. A piece of black marble that was brought from Vindhya Parvat mountain, which is in Madhya Pradesh in central India. And that deity is, you may have seen him in Jaipur. He's about 8 inches high. He's at the local Radha Damodar temple there. And before any large temples were built, our Goswamis were worshipping their deities very simply. Of course, with the utmost devotion, but because they were renunciates, they didn't have many facilities to worship the deity. Usually they kept them under the tree in which they slept that night. Actually, historical records state that Radha Raman, who we'll be speaking about later, the self-manifested deity of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, was actually worshipped in a tree for many, many, many years before he got his temple. And in the area of the present Radha Raman temple, there used to be a large lake. It was connected to the Jamuna River. And at night, Radha Raman's pujaris would put him in a boat anchored in the middle of the lake for security, for safety. And there in that boat, they stood guard with bows and arrows every night. He was being worshipped in a tree. So at night, for his security, they put him in a boat and rowed out into the middle of that lake. And they stood guard with bows and arrows. And those arrows would be dipped in a homemade poison. It's described that even if that arrow just nicked you, you would die. And it's said that those bows and arrows are still somewhere in the Radha Raman temple. Maybe we can ask Pundarik Goswami one day to show us the bows and arrows, but don't touch them. So during his presence in Vrindavan, Jiva Goswami was very active in, how can I say, setting things up. He was a very good organizer. For example, in the year 1558, Jiva Goswami purchased the land that we now know as Sevakunj. Sevakunj. And actually many of Radha and Krishna's loving pastimes took place in Sevakunj 5,000 years ago. And I've seen records in the Vrindavan Research Institute, which is near our Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan, where it said that Jiva Goswami purchased the area of Sevakunj for 30 rupees. Of course, 30 rupees meant a lot more in those days. And he purchased it from Ali Kant Chaudhary, who was Emperor Akbar's local landlord. Vrindavan had a local landlord, Ali Kant Chaudhary. And the original deed for that purchase is now kept in the Vrindavan Research Institute. And it mentions on that deed that the tract of land that he bought included Sevakunj, Danguli, Imlital, Shringarsthali, and Rashasthali. Those are places we've touched on in our lectures the last few months. And the boundaries of the property that he purchased for 30 rupees were marked by 4 trees, one in each corner. A tamarind tree, a banyan tree, a pipal tree, and a kadamba tree. So much nectarian details. In his last days, Srila Rupa Goswami gave all his manuscripts to Jiva Goswami, and he requested him to write commentaries on them. And when Srila Rupa Goswami departed, Jiva Goswami placed his transcendental body in samadhi at the Radha Damodar temple, his temple. And on that, well, it's described as an auspicious day, the Goswamis Raghunath Bhatta, Gopal Bhatta, and Raghunath Das Goswami, and all the other Vaishnavas in attendance, they proclaimed to Jiva Goswami, from this day on, you are our master and our leader. He had those leadership qualities. He was the youngest of the 6 Goswamis. He came later, but again, a good organizer, visionary. He saw Vrindavan perhaps like it is today, with thousands of temples and millions of pilgrims and glorified all over the world. Why not? He had transcendental vision. So he, like I say, he set it up. And Jiva Goswami went on to be the most prolific of all the 6 Goswamis. He wrote volumes and volumes of transcendental literature. And when he finally passed away, he was also placed in samadhi at his dear Radha Damodar temple. It's kind of a brief overview. I wasn't planning that, but that's a brief overview. So we, as ISKCON devotees, we must make it a point to visit the samadhis of these great souls in Sri Vrindavan Dham. What is a samadhi actually? Well, unlike common men who are buried and more or less forgotten after death, great devotees of the Lord are buried but remembered and worshipped. Their spiritualized bodies are lovingly placed in the sacred earth of, if possible, in the sacred earth of Sri Vrindavan Dham, near to one of Krishna's temples or one of his Leela stans. Srila Prabhupada once said, quote, if you cultivate spiritual knowledge in large quantities, then your body is no longer material. If you cultivate spiritual knowledge in large quantities, then your body is no longer material. It becomes spiritualized. Chinmoya, Prabhupada said, Chinmoya. Therefore, the body of a great saintly person is not burned. It is buried in samadhi because a Vaishnava's body is Chinmoya. It's pure. And these samadhi mandirs, you could say, mandirs, act as focal points for faithful devotees to connect with the mercy, the blessings, and the inspiration which continuously emanates from these realized souls in samadhi. By visiting samadhis and offering obeisances and, circumambulating them, offering prayers, offering articles of worship, a sincere devotee can receive the mercy of these great souls. Because liberated souls are beyond the limitations of time and space. And they can reciprocate with their worshippers. I was just reading Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he wrote in this connection that, quote, "The eternal associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can show themselves to us if they choose to do so. Please, reveal yourself to me. Give me mercy to help push on the movement that you started." The eternal associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can show themselves to us if they choose to do so. There's an intimate connection to remembering our great saints, actually, and attaining eternal residence in Vrindavan. In his Gita Vali, Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes, quote, "You should all remember Srila Kavikarnapura and all his family members, who are all sincere servants of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You should also remember the father of Kavikarnapura, Shivananda Sen. Always remember all those Vaishnavas who strictly follow the path of Srila Rupa Goswami and who are absorbed in bhajan. If you actually want residence in the land of Braja, then you must remember all the Vaishnavas who are followers of Srila Rupa Goswami." Wow. Now, one such follower, or you could say a compatriot of Sri Rupa Goswami, that I would like to discuss today, this is actually the subject matter of today's lecture, is Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami. And of course, as I mentioned, his Ishtadev, Sri Radha Ramanji. The difficulty in describing the life of Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami is that there's not a lot of information about him, at least compared to Sri Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatana Goswami. I did a lot of research and contacted a lot of senior devotees, and I concluded that, he's hardly mentioned anywhere in our Shastras, somewhat. He's not mentioned in Chaitanya Bhagavat. He's not mentioned in Chaitanya Mangal, two great treatises on the life and times of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Even Chaitanya Charitamrita, little. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami only mentions him briefly. He just writes that he's one of the 6 prominent Shiksha gurus. That's how he puts it. And fortunately, Narahari Chakravarti, he gives a detailed account, somewhat, of Gopal Bhatta Goswami in his Bhakti Ratnakara. So the question may be raised as to why Gopal Bhatta Goswami is hidden from our view, so to speak. Well, the most probable answer is that out of extreme humility, he didn't want to be mentioned. The Vaishnava is very humble by nature. So he had extreme humility, Gopal Bhatta Goswami. In Srila Prabhupada's purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila 10:105, we hear, quote, "When Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami took permission from all the Vaishnavas before writing Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Gopal Bhatta Goswami also gave him his blessings but he requested him not to mention his name in the book, out of his humility. Therefore, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami has mentioned Gopal Bhatta Goswami only very cautiously in one or two passages of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, unquote. So Srila Prabhupada made it very clear. Kavikarna Pura has revealed to us in his Gora Gunadesha Dipika 184 who this illustrious personality, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, is in the spiritual world. He writes, Ananga Manjari Yashit Sadya Gopala Bhatta Ka Bhatta Goswami Nam Kichit Ahu Shriguna Manjari. Quote, she who was formerly Ananga Manjari has appeared to enrich Mahaprabhu's pastimes as Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Some say that Gopal Bhatta is actually Guna Manjari, unquote. So Gopal Bhatta was born in 1503 near Sri Rangam in South India as the son of Venkata Bhatta. He was an aristocratic South Indian Brahmin from the Ramanuja Sampradaya. And in 1511, Lord Chaitanya, during his tour of South India, visited this holy dham of Sri Rangam. And it's described that when he went to the temple to take darshan of the deity of Ranganath, this beautiful deity, you may have seen him, it's extraordinarily beautiful deity, long deity of Ranganath, Mahaprabhu started chanting and dancing. And it's described that during the kirtan, Mahaprabhu, quote, roared like a lion, unquote. Roared like a lion. Now, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is often referred to as Hari. And the word Hari can be taken to mean a number of things, but one meaning is lion. For example, Narasimhadev, he's called Narahari, half man, half lion. So why is Mahaprabhu sometimes addressed as Hari, as a lion? Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati explains in Chaitanya Chandamrita that Lord Chaitanya has a golden complexion like a lion. His hair is down to his shoulders like the mane of a lion. He has a broad chest and a thin waist like a lion. He appeared in the Simha Rasi, or Leel constellation, and like a lion, he would enter a cave and roar and send the resident elephants running from the cave for their lives. So it looks like sometimes Lord Chaitanya would live in caves also in his tour of South India, and he would go in and roar and the elephants would leave. And then he would occupy the cave. Similarly, our acharyas say that we may invite the lion of Lord Chaitanya into our hearts, where he will roar, Haribol, 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 and send the elephant-like anarthas, like lust, anger, and greed, running away from our hearts. Then that Supreme Lord will occupy the cave of our hearts forever. Hare Krishna, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki. So Venkat Bhatta was a priest in the temple, and when he saw this amazing kirtan of Lord Chaitanya, he was stunned. At one point he grabbed the feet of the Lord and requested him to come to his house. And the Lord agreed. And when he got there, Venkat Bhatta washed the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya. And he gave that Charanamrita to his 10-year-old son, Gopal Bhatta, to drink. Now it's described in Bhakti Ratnakara that when he drank the Charanamrita of Lord Chaitanya, Gopal Bhatta was weeping and crying. And one obvious reason is because, well, Lord Chaitanya's Radharani, or at least a combination, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Radha Krishna Nahiyanga. Mahaprabhu is a combination of Radha and Krishna, so Radha is there. So an obvious reason is because Mahaprabhu is Radha, he's in the mood of Radharani, and Gopal Bhatta Goswami is a Nanga Manjari, as we heard earlier, Radharani's younger sister. So they were uniting again. Nanga Manjari and Radharani were uniting again. So this is one reason it's described by the Acharyas that when Gopal Bhatta took that Charnamrita of Mahaprabhu's feet, he was weeping and crying. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ended up staying 4 months with Venkat Bhatta's family. And Gopal Bhatta, as a young boy, 10 years old, he had the chance to render a lot of personal service to Lord Chaitanya. It's mentioned many times, like massaging his legs. One day Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was resting while young Gopal Bhatta massaged his beautiful legs. And it said that, quote, "Pleased with the boy's menial service, the Lord disclosed many confidential things to him. He addressed Gopal as a confidential companion of Srimati Radharani." And then Gopal, 10-year-old Gopal, he replied, quote, "And you, my Lord, are the son of Nanda Maharaj, who has assumed Srimati Radharani's color as a disguise," unquote. A very deep conversation for a 10-year-old boy. But Gopal Bhatta went on to say that he was very sad. He said to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, "I'm very sad because I didn't get to witness your pastimes in Navadvip. Your appearance, your pastimes as a child, your pastimes as a householder, etc." The Acharyas write that Gopal's sorrow was clearly evident. His eyes were full of tears, and his actions reflected the ecstasy of divine madness, unquote. So Lord Chaitanya was silent, but that night, in order to pacify the boy, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Mahaprabhu appeared to him in a dream. And in the dream, Gopal Bhatta saw Navadvip, like with all the tall palm trees everywhere and the Ganges River, etc. Then suddenly, he saw Nimai Pandit walking gracefully along the banks of the river. It said, like a young elephant. And when he looked closely, he also saw Lord Nityananda and Advaita Prabhu and many others accompanying the Lord, and they're all chanting Hare Krishna. And as the kirtan party approached, Mahaprabhu kept looking at Gopal Bhatta. And as the party met him, Lord Nityananda reached out to embrace Gopal Bhatta, but just then Gopal Bhatta woke up. And in ecstasy, he jumped out of bed and ran out of his room to Lord Chaitanya's room, to Lord Chaitanya's quarters. Now, Lord Chaitanya was actually waiting for Gopal Bhatta to arrive. But when Gopal Bhatta opened the door, what did he see? Instead of seeing Lord Chaitanya as a sannyasi, he saw the Lord had assumed his form as a cowherd boy with a blue complexion, playing his flute. Something similar actually happened to Ramananda Roy. It's mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita that one time Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also appeared to him as a cowherd boy. And at that time, Ramananda Roy, he said to Lord Chaitanya, "Pahili dekilun tomara, sannyasi swarup, ebe toma deki mushi, shaim gopu rup." He said, quote, "At first I saw you appear like a sannyasi, but now I am seeing you as Shyamasundar, the cowherd boy," unquote. So there's a description of the form of the cowherd boy that Gopal Bhatta saw. It's described very nicely. Quote, "The Lord's eyebrows were curved like a bow. His soothing glance was more than adequate to steal the hearts of women. His face outshone an autumn moon, and his soft smile emanated rays of sweetness. He wore a beautiful dhoti, expertly wrapped in 3 folds around his body. A malati garland hung from his neck and his limbs, which moved with a certain grace, and they were all decorated with ornaments, unquote. So then, from that form as a cowherd boy, Lord Chaitanya turned into Nimai Pandit, as Gopal Bhatta had seen him in the dream. The same form, and stunned by this, seeing Nimai Pandit, it went from Lord Chaitanya to the cowherd boy, and then to Nimai. So he'd seen all these forms of the Lord. So at this point, stunned, Gopal Bhatta fell at the feet of Nimai Pandit. But when he got up, he found himself once again with the Lord as a sannyasi, with a shaven head and saffron cloth. So in this way, Gopal Bhatta Goswami had very, very personal dealings with Lord Chaitanya and Sri Ranga. So at the end of 4 months, Lord Chaitanya was preparing to continue his tour of South India. And you can imagine what the young boy Gopal Bhatta was going through. So he came to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and he said, "My dear Mahaprabhu, I want to come with you. Take me with you. I want to serve you." He said, "Prem dan jana vyarta dharidar jivan." Without prema, one is impoverished. Please take me and empower me with your love. Prem dana jana vyarta dharidar jivan. Without prema, one is impoverished. Please take me and empower me with your love. Whew. But Mahaprabhu told him, "No, Gopal, you should stay here with your parents. They're elderly. You take care of them. And one day when they depart, my instruction, you go to Vrindavan. There you will meet Rupa and Sanatan. They will reveal to you the mysteries of my truths and my moods. In this way, you will understand everything about Radha and Krishna in Braj." And then Mahaprabhu left. And that was the last time that Gopal Bhatta Goswami ever saw Lord Chaitanya. Brings tears to your eyes. That's the last time you saw him. So in time, Gopal Bhatta Goswami took initiation from his uncle, the brother of Venkat Bhatta. His uncle was the great Prabodhananda Saraswati. We'll be speaking about him at some point as well. That he was a disciple of Prabodhananda Saraswati is confirmed. I found it in Hari Bhakti Vilas 1:2, quote, "Gopal Bhatta, the disciple of Prabodhananda, who is dear to the Lord, has collected these devotional activities to satisfy Raghunath Das, Rupa, and Sanatana Goswamis." So the first part of that verse is relevant to what we're mentioning here. Gopal Bhatta, the disciple of Prabodhananda. Yes. Now, years later, when Gopal Bhatta's parents died, instead of running to Jagannath Puri, where Lord Chaitanya was still performing his pastimes, and some very special pastimes, instead of going there, he dutifully left for Braj. He had a choice of Vapu or Vani. Vapu means the personal association of a great soul, and Vani means to follow their instructions. So you can just imagine, Mahaprabhu is not that far away in Jagannath Puri, and he still had some years left on this planet. And we know how close the two of them were. But he chose Vani. He chose to follow the instructions. This is very instructive to all of us. Both Vani and Vapu are important, but Srila Prabhupada has told us that of the two, Vani Seva is more important. Because the form of the Lord or the spiritual master may disappear at some point, but their instructions, they remain eternally. Prabhupada would sometimes repeat the saying, Vilasi rutat nityam bhakti shodanta vani. May the teachings of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati eternally dance in the courtyard of my heart. Vilasi rutat nityam bhakti shodanta vani. May the teachings of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati eternally dance in the courtyard of my heart. And once Prabhupada said to a group of disciples, quote, I did not know anything about writing, but my spiritual master told me to spread Lord Krishna's glories in English. So this is what I tried to do, following in the steps of my Guru Maharaj. He was such a transcendental aristocrat. I had no great personal qualifications. I just tried to follow his instructions. So that is also our life, following the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, forever and forevermore, in this world and in the spiritual world. We'll also assist him there. So, Lord Chaitanya had told Sanatana Goswami and Rupa Goswamis that, quote, one day a wonderful boy, he said, called Gopal Bhatta, will come to Vrindavan. So please take care of him as you would take care of a younger brother. And Gopal Bhatta Goswami went straight to Vrindavan. He took shelter of Rupa and Sanatan. And as soon as he arrived, Rupa and Sanatan wrote to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Puri that Gopal had arrived, because they'd received an instruction from Mahaprabhu, take care of this boy. So they wrote to Mahaprabhu, he has arrived. And when that letter, letters in those days went by people taking the letter across the country, it must have taken some time. But it's described that when that letter arrived in Puri one day, the Lord and his associates were taking prasadam in the house of Gadadhar Pandit. And upon receiving that letter, Lord Chaitanya was ecstatic to learn that Gopal Bhatta Goswami had finally arrived in Vrindavan. And it's said that he immediately left his meal and composed a letter for Rupa and Sanatan and sent it to Vrindavan, along with a set of his kopans, an outer cloth, and a choki, means a small slab of wood, which the Lord would sit on, as gifts for Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Now the Acharyas say that Lord Chaitanya sent his kopans because when the kopan of a self-realized personality is accepted as prasad, quote, the attack of kamadeva and lust will diminish in the life of the devotee. When the kopan of a self-realized personality is accepted as prasad, the attack of kamadeva and lust will diminish in the life of a devotee. And in our Shastras, there's also the pastime where Lord Chaitanya rips apart the kopans of Lord Nityananda Prabhu and tells the devotee to accept the threads as prasadam. And he tells them to tie the threads on his head, and all lust will disappear from his heart. Take those threads, tie them on your head, and all lust will disappear from your heart. Now, also in Lord Chaitanya's letter to Rupa and Sanatan Goswamis, he instructed that Gopal Bhatta Goswami should start giving diksha. He should start initiating. And that's interesting because Rupa and Sanatan Goswami were very humble. They were not accepting disciples. Rupa Goswami eventually accepted one disciple, Srila Jiva Goswami. And Lokanath Goswami, who was also present, he was the first Goswami to come to Vrindavan, he'd taken a vow not to initiate anyone. But later, due to the humility of Srila Narottam Das Thakur, he accepted him. But here in that letter, Mahaprabhu instructed that at some point this Gopal Bhatta Goswami should start initiating. And it's described that everyone in Vrindavan was attracted to him. I read a beautiful description of him. Quote, regal in appearance, like a king amongst Brahmins, with a smile that shone with compassion. The other Goswamis of Braja were his life heir, and Radha Raman and the Radha Raman deity was his very soul. Let's repeat that. He was regal in appearance, like a king amongst Brahmanas, with a smile that shone with compassion. The other Goswamis of Braja were his life heir, and the Radha Raman deity was his very soul. We'll be talking about Radha Raman pretty soon. Nevertheless, despite his exalted stature, he always remained in an attitude of meekness and humility. As we mentioned earlier, after Lord Chaitanya departed this world, Kaviraj Goswami approached Gopal Bhatta for permission to write the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Gopal Bhatta granted that, but don't mention me. Don't mention my name. Phew. Extreme humility. And while Gopal Bhatta Goswami lived in Vrindavan, for many, many years, he lived in an underground chamber, it's described, underground chamber at Shanketa, next to the deity of Shanketa Devi. Shanketa's where Radha and Krishna first met, where he remained deeply absorbed in remembering the pastimes of that place. But one day, Lord Chaitanya again appeared to him in a dream and said, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, go to the Kali Gandaki river and find Sri Hari. Now, the Kali Gandaki river, many of you know, it's a sacred river that flows in present-day Nepal, high in the Himalayas. I've been there on 3 occasions. And one holy spot there is Muktinath. It's like a small mountain you have to climb to go to the top, Muktinath. So in that basin, below that mountain, Muktinath, this is where the sacred Kali Gandaki river flows. And this is where the Shalagram Shilas come. So he said, go to the Kali Gandaki and find Sri Hari, which means find the Lord in his self-manifested form as Shalagram Shila. Now, again, this is India 500 years ago. So that's an arduous journey from Vrindavan up to the Kali Gandaki. But he went there, he walked there, and he brought back, to make a long story short, he brought back 12 Shalagram Shilas. And on the way back, he passed through a village called Devabanda. And there he met a Brahmin by the name Madhav Prasad Sharma. Madhav Prasad Sharma. And this Madhav Prasad Sharma had 2 illustrious sons, Gopinath Sharma and Damodar Sharma. And at that time, Gopal Bhatta Goswami initiated them. And they came a short time later to assist him in the worship of the Shalagram Shilas in Vrindavan. Now, of course, Gopal Bhatta Goswami worshipped those Shilas very nicely, but he was always thinking that he would like to worship the Lord in a form where he could dress him in fine clothes and ornaments. Because Shalagram, Prabhupada said, you wake him up, you worship him, you put him to sleep. This is Shalagram worship. Prabhupada said one time, you wake him up, you worship him, put to sleep. It's very simple. A very high worship. Actually, Prabhupada writes in Chaitanya Charitamrita in a purport that he was just waiting till his disciples, some of his disciples, really reached the Brahminical platform. And then he would introduce the worship of Shalagram Shila. Prabhupada wrote, but that's a purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So it's a very elevated worship. So, but Gopal Bhatta Goswami, he was thinking, that like the other Goswamis, they had their deities and they were dressing them in fine clothes and ornaments and crowns and jewels. So in his heart, he was thinking like that. And one day a rich merchant gave Gopal Bhatta Goswami a number of beautiful items to worship a deity, like clothes and ornaments and crowns and feathers. And it's described that Gopal Bhatta Goswami was worried that all those beautiful objects would be wasted because there was no way he could use them unless he had a deity in human form. So one night, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared to him once again in a dream in Vrindavan. And he said, quote, "My dear Gopal Bhatta Goswami, I'm very pleased with your worship. I'm also very pleased that you initiated Gopinath and Damodar Sharma to assist you. I know your heart is anxious because the shalagram doesn't have a form, but I assure you, very soon, Krishna will manifest from the Shila, from a Shila, depending on your intensity and hankering." So there's a clue to all of us. If we want to see Krishna one day, and that should be our heartbeat, it will depend upon our intensity and hankering to see him. And for that we have to give up all our nonsense attraction to whatever is glimmering in this world. All that glimmers is not gold. There's no gold in this world, really. It's just an iron ore. So Krishna will manifest from the Shila depending on your intensity and hankering. This is called lolium. So when Gopal Bhatta Goswami awoke, he was in ecstasy. He knew that very soon one of his shalagram Shilas was going to manifest, let us say, a threefold bending form, which he could dress with clothes and give a flute and a turban and a feather, peacock feather. So it's described that in anticipation for the arrival of the Lord, every day he would put all his 12 shalagram Shilas in a straw basket, and he would swing them from a tree, like we do Julian Yatra, Radha and Krishna, to get ready. He was swinging the shalagrams in the tree, like this, and he was singing bhajans to them. And while doing this, he would think in his mind that when my deity comes, he will have the face of Govindaji, the chest of Gopinath, and the feet of Madan Mohan. And often when doing puja to his Shilas in the morning, he would bathe them. And he would say, quote, "Today I have bathed you with my tears. Why aren't you taking the form that Mahaprabhu has promised? I know you are there. Today I have bathed you with my tears. Why aren't you taking the form that Mahaprabhu has promised? I know you're there." Now at this point, there are two authorized versions of what transpired next. And my favorite one is as follows. This expectant mood of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, you could say it exploded on the day of Narasingha Chaturdashi, the appearance day of Lord Nrsingadev. His mood just, I know you're there, come out. And how is that so? How did that mood explode? I guess that's the best word I can find, explode. Because that day, that's the day of Lord Nrsingadev's appearance, everyone in Braj was talking about the pastime of how Lord Nrsingadev came out of a stone pillar. And all day long he was hearing this pastime, and he would cry, "If only I was Prahlad." The Lord manifested it from stone, a stone pillar for Prahlad. If only I was Prahlad, he would say. So that evening, he gave his shalagrams an ultimatum. He said to them, I'm going to the Jamuna to take a bath. And when I come back, if I don't see a manifestation of your form, then I will tie all of you up around my neck and I'll go jump in the Jamuna River and take my life. That was his ultimatum. I'm going to take a bath, and if I come back and one of you has not manifested in that form that Mahaprabhu promised, I'm going to take all of you and wrap you around my neck and jump in the Jamuna River and die. He said, what is the use of worshipping you all if you don't reciprocate? And it said that when he was scolding the Shalagram Shilas, they were trembling. Now, of course, only pure devotees can chastise Krishna, and therefore we should not imitate him in our worship of our deities. No, they are the masters and we are the very humble servants. But they were trembling. So, he went, he took his bath, and when he came back, he could not believe his eyes. His principal Damodar Shila had manifested into the sweet, threefold bending form of Sri Radha Ramanji. Ki Jai. Sri Radha Raman Ki Jai. A favorite deity of devotees. Most of you have either seen Radha Raman in person or his photo, such an amazing deity. One could easily say that Radha Raman is the heartbeat of Vrindavan. His ardent followers, they say that whoever takes the darshan of Radha Raman gets the benefit of seeing Govindaji, Gopinath, and Madan Mohan. As per the desire, that was the desire of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, that his deity would incorporate the features of those deities. Now, interestingly, because he manifested, Radha Raman manifested from a Shalagram Shila, there's no Radharani. Then why is he called Radha Raman? Raman means to give pleasure, so Radha Raman means he who gives pleasure to Radha. So why is he called Radha Raman? There's no Radha there. Well, Rupa Goswami commented on this, and he said that when Radha Raman appeared, he appeared near Nidhivan, the place of Rasa Leela. That's the place where Krishna gives the greatest pleasure to Radharani. So he got the name Radha Raman. And of course, next to Radha Raman, on the altar at the Radha Raman temple, is a beautiful throne just off to his left. There's a little throne there. And on the throne is a feather. And on that feather is written Radharani's name in Sanskrit. It's always covered by a cloth, so we can't see it. So Radha's there because she's non-different than her name. Rashtadam kurvatashtrashto dadami bhaktim uttamam da sabdam kurvata paschad yami shravana lobata. Quote, on hearing the syllable Ra, I become anxious and bestow the most pristine bhakti upon the chanter. And on hearing the syllable Da, I personally follow the chanter in order to hear the chanting of the name Radha. That's Krishna speaking in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana. On hearing the syllable Ra, I become anxious and bestow the most pristine bhakti upon the chanter. And on hearing the syllable Da, I personally follow the chanter in order to hear the chanting of the name Radha from the lotus mouth of Krishna. So Radha is none different than her name. So her name is written in Sanskrit on that feather, which is covered by a cloth, sometimes a crown, just next to her beloved Radha Raman. So now, after Radha Raman appeared, many incredible loving exchanges took place between Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Radha Raman. Once the deity called Gopal Bhatta Goswami and revealed himself as Gopal, tending cows and surrounded by cowherd boys. This happened in Vrindavan. On another occasion, Gopal Bhatta was feeling great separation from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and so Radha Raman manifested himself as Lord Chaitanya in the freshness of youth, dressed as a Brahmin. Yes. And for a moment, Gopal Bhatta Goswami just stood and stared at this enchanting form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that Radha Raman had manifested. And then overcome with bliss, he called out, "What have I seen? What have I seen? What have I seen?" And he fell to the ground unconscious. And the Bhakti Ratnakara makes a very profound statement about the relationship between Gopal Bhatta Goswami and his Radha Raman. It says, quote, Radha Raman would at once satisfy whatever desire found a place in the heart of Gopal Bhatta. Such is the bond between the Lord and his devotee. And of course, Gopal Bhatta Goswami would worship Radha Raman with unparalleled love and devotion. A very close friend and associate of Gopal Bhatta Goswami was Bhugarbha Goswami, whose samadhi is also in the Radha Damodar temple. And this very good friend of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Bhugarbha Goswami, would sometimes watch the puja of Gopal Bhatta Goswami to Radha Raman, it said, with great satisfaction. He'd just sit there and watch. Hare Krishna. It was after the appearance of Radha Raman that Gopal Bhatta Goswami started to accept disciples in earnest, as previously ordered by Lord Chaitanya. That's when he started accepting disciples. At that time I read also that Raghunath Bhatta Goswami also started initiating at the same time. And just a note of interest, Gopal Bhatta Goswami was empowered to initiate those who came from the western side of India, whereas Raghunath Bhatta Goswami would initiate all the devotees who came from the areas of Bengal. And it's written that Gopal Bhatta Goswami was loving, but he was very strict with his disciples. And I read that once one of his disciples advocated that devotees, it's not required to fast on Ekadasi. He was going around saying that. It's not required. And Gopal Bhatta warned him, this is not correct, this is not proper. But he insisted on it. And for this transgression, at one point, Gopal Bhatta Goswami rejected this disciple. So Gopal Bhatta Goswami's most famous and prominent disciple was Srinivasacharya, who was directed by Srila Jiva Goswami to take Diksha from Gopal Bhatta, even though Srinivas was from the eastern side, from Bengal. And in my readings, I discovered that Gopal Bhatta Goswami had planned to put Srinivas Acharya in charge of Radha Raman's worship. But when he saw the greater importance of his disciples' preaching, he ordered him to return to Bengal instead. He was going to put him in charge, because Srinivas Acharya was a good organizer, like Jiva Goswami as well. He was of the three transcendental persons, Narottam Das Thakur, Shyamananda Pandit, and Srinivas Acharya. You could say the original second generation who continued the preaching after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left this world. Amongst those three, it was Srinivas Acharya, a little elder, and he was kind of like the organizer. He'd always organize the festivals and the events, etc. This is nicely described if you find a book by my god sisters, Sitala Dasi. I think it's a well-known fact already, but she wrote a beautiful, beautiful book about Narottam Das Thakur. And I'm sure in that book she indicated how the special characteristics of each of those personalities, Narottam Das Thakur, Shyamananda Pandit, and Srinivasacharya. So get a copy of that book. So when Gopal Bhatta Goswami saw that he was a preacher, he said, no, you go back to Bengal and you preach. So, and we know that Gopal Bhatta Goswami initiated a very high standard of deity worship for Radha Raman. One time Srila Prabhupada told some of his disciples that to understand deity worship, they should observe the worship of Radha Raman in his temple in Vrindavan. And Prabhupada was well aware of that standard, because while he was staying in Vrindavan for a number of years, preparing to go to the West, every morning he would visit the 7 temples of Vrindavan, and in the evening he would again go back to the 7 temples for darshan. That's the tradition. So each morning he would first take darshan of Radha Damodar in Radha Damodar's temple where he was staying, and then after performing Madhukari. It's hard for me to imagine Prabhupada performing Madhukari, begging door to at 3 houses you beg for some prasad, and that's your sustenance for the day. So after performing Madhukari, Prabhupada would go for darshan at the Radha Raman temple, and he would chant japa at the samadhi of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, which is right next to Radha Raman temple. And when we do our Kartik Purikamas, we always take darshan of Radha Ramanji, and then we go to the Samadhi Mandir of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. And we have kirtans there, and we chant japa there. So, So in 1586, 100 years after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance, Gopal Bhatta Goswami passed away at the age of 85. And again, that's where his sacred samadhi is, on the property, you could say, of the Radha Raman temple. Very close to where Radha Raman appeared from the Damodar Shila. However, he very kindly left us his Vani. He left us his Vani. He had the Vani from Mahaprabhu, and he passed on that Vani, his instructions, to us in the form of the books he wrote for all of us, of which Srila Prabhupada has expanded upon and commented on for all of us. The famous books that Gopal Bhatta Goswami left us are Hari Bhakti Vilas, Shri Kuriya Shara Deepika, and Samskara Deepika. Very important books. Thus we can say that he lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. So today I would like to finish with some very beautiful prayers to Gopal Bhatta Goswami. They're by Srila Yadunandan Das Thakur from his Karnananda chapter 5. Karnananda chapter 5. Madhavananda Prabhu kindly sent these to me. I was inquiring from him if he knew of any special prayers for Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and just this morning he sent them to me. So thank you, Madhavananda Prabhu, a great scholar in our Krishna conscious movement. Wonderful disciple of his Guru Maharaj, Gaur Govinda Maharaj. So here are the beautiful prayers, which I think upon hearing now, we will appreciate much more, because we've heard the glories of this great devotee, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and his beloved deity, Radha Ramanji. So, may Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami, who has the power to incessantly glorify devotional service of Lord Hari, and who is detached from perishable material objects as a result of his uninterrupted spiritual realization, be manifest in my heart, His home has become glorious with the fortune of being the destination of the Supreme Lord Mahaprabhu. May Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami, who is celebrated by the name Gunamanjari in the land of Braja, be manifest in my heart. Lord Sri Chaitanya, who appears out of compassion for the people of Kali Yuga, has impelled him to expand the exquisite bliss of transcendental conjugal mellows. May Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami be manifest in my heart. Relishing the taste of his particular loving mood in Braja, he has become mad. In that condition, he is restless, and he dances, laughs, and sings madly. Given the order to deliver the conditioned souls beaten by the age of Kali, he makes himself visible to the eyes. If Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Raghunath Das Goswami come forward to help one nourish the excellent divine love for Sri Radha's beloved, what possibly is there that one will not achieve with ease? One who understands these words and their meanings, which are imbued with the loving moods and affections of pure devotees, and which depict the various mellows of transcendental exchange in pure divine love, that very person, by reciting this supreme jewel-like glorification which destroys all ignorance, will soon himself become a manjari, a young cowherd girl who assists the gopis, and in that form enter into a group of such young maidservants of Radharani. I offer my obeisances unto Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami, whose heart is overwhelmed with transcendental love for Srila Sanatana Goswami, who is distinguished in every respect on account of Srila Rupa Goswami's friendship, whose life and soul is Sri Radha Raman, and who fulfills the aspirations of his servitors. Whew. Wow. Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami ki, Sri Radha Ramanji ki, Rupa Sanatana Goswami's ki, Six Goswamis of Vrindavan ki, Sri Prabhupada ki. Back home, back to Godhead, to join all those illustrious souls, somehow or other, in their service to the divine couple. By Srila Prabhupada's grace. Thank you, Prabhus. I'll end here. I'll look forward to seeing you in a few days. I think that I'll attempt somehow to describe the glories of Srila Jiva Goswami, if I get some mercy to do so. Shishi Gauranitai ki, Shishi Krishna Balaram ki, Shishi Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari ki, Shri Gunamanjari ki, Nangamanjari ki, Shri Gopal Bhatta Goswami ki, Shri Radha Ramanji ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, back home, back to Godhead, Shri Goloka Vrindavan Dham ki. Take everybody else with us. Hare Krishna. See you soon. All glories to Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Sri Radhe Sham. All right, ball.